Night was thick over the listening post. No planets shone. No merchant lanes burned bright. Only radio dishes turned like silent flowers. They hunted noise. They waited for small danger. The first sound was wrong. It did not fit a name or a number. It came as a shape. The machines drew lines and curves, and a reader made a guess. The reader sent an alarm. The alarm was small. It should have stayed small. It did not. On the council world, screens buzzed with a dull blue. Men and women in glass rooms watched a band of dots move across a star chart. They spoke in calm words that smelled of practice. An envoy wrote, "Possible relic signal." A general said, "Probe it." A diplomat said, "Report only." None of them said the old word. None of them wanted to. Far from the core, on a trading moon of broken lights, an old mechanic sat by his radio. His hands were oiled dark and steady. He had worked on little freighters for 50 years. He had no place in the council, and no time for titles. He had only memory. Memory kept names that laws had lost. The signal came to him on a slow night. It slid through the static like a finger on glass. The machine showed a map, no market sold. The map had lines that stopped at a name he had not heard since childhood, the Midnight Anchor. He laughed a small laugh, and then he did not laugh at all. He ran his palm over the screen. It felt like a bone under cloth. He told one man. He told one woman. They told a neighbor. The news crawled, then it fed. People who had laughed at old tales began to hold their breath. Merchants locked safes. Traders closed lanes. The moon wore a hush like a grave. A probe left the listening post in the dark. It was small and careful. Cameras taped over old paint. Its engine whispered. The council tracked it with polite numbers and thin patience. The probe slid toward the place marked Midnight Anchor. Its feed returned only black for a long time. Then, slow and bright, an image came. The image showed stone. Stone that did not belong to the place where metal floated. Stone with lines cut deep. The cut lines made a face that no camera had ever seen. The probe moved in and saw letters. The letters were old and bright, like a fire left in the dark. In the center of the stone was a symbol that made the pilot's breath stop, even though the pilot was a recorded feed and could not feel. On the other side of the galaxy, in a small bar, a smuggler turned the image up. He drank and did not swallow. He had heard the same name as a child. His mother had whispered it when the stars got too loud. He reached for his sleeve. He kept old tools there. Tools cost little and told much. Back in the council, a pale man in a high chair tapped a glass screen until his knuckles hurt. The probes came back with more. They showed cold docks. They showed hulls without flags. They showed a wall carved with a single bright word. The men in suits said, "Unclear origin." The woman at the console said, "It is a return." Her voice was thin. The carved word did not read like a command. It read like a memory. It read, "Return." Silence grew heavy. Traders hid ships. Patrols moved slow and careful. A white ship, small and close to the moon, breathed warm like a sleeping animal. It had no flag. It said nothing. Its hull slept among shadow and old dust. No one knew whose child it might be. On the trading moon, the mechanic kept the image on his table like a small son. He had seen faces in the stone that matched faces in his dreams. He touched a scar on his hand and remembered a story his father told. A story of ships that hid when they had to. Ships that promised to come back when the time was right. He had always thought it was a sailor's lie. Now, he could not say . At the edge of a ruined dock, a small team of council scouts opened a crate. Inside lay a device that breathed like a sleeping thing. It hummed and then showed a feed. The feed came from within a ship. Slower than the storms, the camera moved down a passage and into a bridge. Shade filled the room. Shapes sat like a council of dark stones. One rose and held something folded. Its hands were long and clean. It lifted a flag that no market sold. The flag's pattern matched the carved symbol on the probe stone. For a long moment, the feed held only the flag, numbered, name, no speech. The camera clicked as if an old heart had hit a wall. Then a voice came from the device. It was low and plain. It said one sentence, and the sentence moved through every loud place like water through a pipe. "We remember," it said, "and we come home." The council scrambled. They sent orders in the thin, urgent language of people who think no plan will hold. Patrols moved. Ships tuned to one another. Old alliances sent words that had the taste of old coins. The galaxy was a quick animal now. It would not sleep, but some watched differently. The smuggler, the mechanic, a young pilot who had never seen the core. They watched with a mix of hope and fear. The message touched a place in them that laws had not reached. It called like bell sound in a night market. It asked for a simple thing, a reckoning. The probe kept sending images. They were small pieces, a wall, a carved face, an empty cradle. Each image came in slow time, like a hand turning pages. The last picture the probe sent before the feed cut was a close-up of the stone. The camera found a single word burned deep into the rock. The letters were clean as a knife's edge. The word did not ask anything more. It read, "Return." The feed ended. The screen went black. In the quiet, people felt the shape of something beginning to move. The old mechanic stood and put his hand over his mouth. He had nothing left to trade, but a story. He walked out into the night and shouted the name to anyone who would listen. They began to whisper it back. The galaxy woke on edge. Traders closed shutters. Pilots kept their hands near their controls. The carved word from the probe return moved through markets like wind. People who had never left their worlds felt a slow cold inside. They had never known hunger for a home. Now they wondered if someone else did. On a patrolling post near the anchor, an officer watched a pale flare vanish behind a dead sun. The flare left no wreck. It left a burn like salt on the void. The officer sent a small ship to follow. The ship found nothing but dust and a single black smear on the charts. The pilot said a word the patrol had never used in reports. Silent. The officer wrote it down in a thin hand and then burned the page. News moved faster than paper. Ships began to vanish from the lanes. Small cargoes disappeared. A merchant woke in the middle of a transfer and found only silence where the buyer had been. On a dusty station that traded in labor and lives, alarms blinked a steady red. Then, the lights went out. Nobody answered the long calls for help. The belt of children who worked the docks went quiet like a dropped coin. On the council world, glass rooms filled with people who had learned how to look calm. They spoke of rules. They spoke of restraint. Some said the fleet must be allowed to prove itself. Others said the fleet must be stopped before it started. An envoy from the Corps used the old words of law. A general used the old words of power. The two spoke past each other in soft, sharp sentences. Nothing about them touched the fear outside the windows, far from the Corps. In a rusted tavern, a smuggler sat with a map spread like a small wound. He had fingers that knew how to pick both a lock and a pocket. He had heard that name 1,000 times in sleepy mouths. Midnight Anchor. Now the name tasted like a promise and a threat. He folded the map and slipped it under his coat. He would not keep it. He would trade it. The trading moon changed that night. Merchants, who had kept shelves of silence, began to speak. The old mechanic walked through the market with his face pressed to the light. He moved like someone chased by the past. He met the smuggler at a narrow stall that sold engines and lies. They talked in quick breaths. The mechanic spoke of burnt wakes and stone faces. The smuggler listened and then smiled, with no teeth. Both men felt a pull. It was not money. It was something older. The first real strike came at dawn. A small outpost that shipped people and papers vanished with no grand sound. One moment the outpost hummed with trade. The next, every screen in the market showed only a black circle. Where the outpost had been, there was emptiness and a little ash. Survivors told no story. Those who found the place said the machines had been turned off from the inside. There was no grenade blast. There was only absence. The council responded with polite fury. Patrols were sent. Warnings were issued. A fleet of proud warships sailed from the core. Their hulls were bright. Their leaders made speeches into polished microphones. They called for law. They called for trials. They called for proof that would fit their forms. But the fleet that rose from the dark did not want to meet a battle of flags. It moved like winter. It cut supply lines and erased records. Whole administrations woke to find files and names gone. People searched for proofs they had used for years and found blank rooms. In one city, the names of sponsored orphanages no longer existed in any ledger. The children woke as if from a long sleep. Some cried, some laughed. A few simply sat and touched their faces. Secret channels filled with new faces. Humans, or those who carried human blood and old stories, met in shadow. They traded memories and tools. One woman brought a rusted key that fit an old lock in a ship nobody had the right to own. A young pilot offered the route tables his father had kept under a false floor. Smugglers who had made fortunes selling forgetfulness now found themselves selling the opposite, news. Within the quiet wars, a small team boarded a captured war barge. The barge smelled like old victory and older lies. The team moved fast. Their hands knew the old ropes. They found a sealed crate in the barge's storeroom. The crate slept under dust and faded metals. A wire hummed under its lid. Someone pulled. The lid opened like a brow. A device blinked alive. The device was small. It had no name in any registry. It showed a feed from somewhere behind the anchor. The image was at first a blur of metal and shadow. Then the camera swept across a long hangar. It showed ships sleeping under tarps. It showed engines that wore dust like rope. Men and women, or shapes that had once been men, moved with careful hands. They cut straps. They wiped seals. They did not shout. They did not sing. A voice spoke in the feed. The voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It moved like a tide under the image. Light them, it said. The camera found a row of crews. One by one, they pulled back covers. A small engine flared. A ladder creaked. A flag was unfolded in a place where flags slept for a long time, outside the tavern where the smuggler sat. A children's choir chanted a broken rhyme. The smuggler watched the device with hands that did not shake. He heard the words from the feed like a bell. "We remember," the voice said. "We begin." The device cut to black. A line of small dark ships lifted like seeds from the soil. They moved with a slow certainty. Nobody in the stolen footage smiled. They only worked. The image showed the fleet slipping behind the shadow of a dead star. A single caption scrolled at the bottom in letters, old enough to be clean. "Wake." The crate went dim. The team on the barge did not speak, but they felt a weight shift. They had the image now. They had proof of the rising. They could sell it. They could hide it. They could fight with it. The young pilot pressed his palm to the screen and felt that cold spark of belonging that would burn many things in time. The council tightened its nets. Patrols ran faster routes. Merchants hired guards. The galaxy learned a new fear, the fear of things taken back. People who once sold names and homes now washed their faces at night and searched their libraries for old marks. On the trading moon, the mechanic cleaned grease from his hands. He looked to the sky, where the dark ships had passed. He thought of the carved face and the stone word. He thought of children waking in empty rooms. The smuggler folded the map and left a coin on the table. Neither man slept that night. Word traveled in whispers and in red alerts. The hidden fleet had made its first moves. The world felt smaller and more honest. Somewhere, in rooms where maps once lay hidden, someone whispered, They came home, and somewhere else, someone else, closed a safe and drew a breath like a man who has just heard his name called in the dark. When the hidden fleet moved, the rules that held the galaxy together began to fray. Laws are paper until fear touches them. Then paper flies away. In the council's great hall, voices rose and fell like storm wind. Old men with bright collars argued with young diplomats with sharp eyes. One side said, "We must bind them with law." The other said, "We must strike now." No one could find the word for what had happened. They had no name for a return like this. Outside the glass towers, smaller worlds made harder choices. A mid-ring planet, quiet and rich in grain, opened its vault one night. The planet's leaders went to the anchor and promised ships for safety. The hidden fleet accepted. The planet kept its people. It kept its fields. But it also lost its governor. He was given to the fleet as proof of loyalty. The people called it a trade. The governor called it a sentence. On the streets of the planet, some cheered. Others watched with knives under their coats. The trade bought safety for now. It bought peas that tasted like old bread. Yet it bought something else that could not be seen until later. The willingness to give a name for comfort. At the same time, small groups began to move that the council had not counted. Rebels who once hid in data shadows found purpose. They were not armed with grand fleets. They used memory, not missiles. They hacked old records. They opened secret doors and read pages that the council had burned. Each page they found was a wound that had not closed. Each name they uncovered was a small spark. The smugglers and the freed ones watched the sparks. The smuggler from the trading moon walked through those fires with careful steps. He had never been a hero. He traded in secrets because secrets pay. He also kept a small box of old letters no scanner could read. One night, in a hollow shipyard, he met a voice from the fleet. The voice came from a man named Hero. Hero wore no medal. He carried no sword. His face was plain, and his eyes were steady as stone. He spoke in short sentences. He said, "We are not here to rule. We are here to correct scales." The smuggler laughed once. He had heard many dangerous promises. Harrow showed him a wall of names on a small, folded screen. The names moved like stars across a map. Each name had a mark beside it. "These are builders," Harrow said. "These are the ones who sold away worlds. They sold children, markets, memory." The smuggler saw a mark next to a name he knew, his mother's name. His stomach folded. He had traded for a freedom that had a price. He had never read the bill. Harrow told no stories of victory. He told lists. He told records. He spoke of contracts that never saw light. He spoke of ledgers signed by men in bright collars. He spoke of a ship that had once carried a colony and had sold it for coin. The smuggler pressed his hand to the screen and felt the cold of truth. The council tried to hold its face. It sent envoys and threats. It sent a fleet of clean ships with ribbons and speeches. But their words fell into the new world like raindrops into an ocean. They made little rings and then stopped. More small strikes cut at ports and banks. The fleet never fired big guns. It erased proof, then left the guilty alone to find their names gone from files. A senator woke and found his deeds blank. A banker opened a vault and found only dust. This made some leaders desperate. Pride turned to fear. Men who had ordered erasures now begged for mercy. Others who had done nothing now feared they had done more than they remembered. In the council's hall, a man who had once signed the paper that sold a colony felt the air leave his lungs. He had kept the contract. In a drawer he called old work. The drawer was empty now. The world had caught up with him. Rebels used the emptiness as weapon. They spread the newly found names through networks that the council could not close. People read the lists and found their pasts in script. They learned which families had been moved, which children had been sold. The galaxy's small markets hummed with rumor and with rage. Old guards were pushed from balconies. Quiet men who had profited in dark corners began to vanish into the crowds. Then came the day when a famous admiral turned his back on his command. He sent a short broadcast that broke like a stone through still water. The admiral had been a face the Corps used in parades. His voice was public and trusted. He had sailed for law and order. Now his voice spoke in a different key. He did not shout. He read a list. The list was long and cold. It named men and worlds. It named people who had signed away other people. It named the trader houses that had bought human cargo. The feed showed ledger marks, ink dried like old blood. The council watched the list scroll. In the glass room, the pale man with the high chair felt a hand close his throat. The list reached into his memories and pulled out a hidden thing. The admiral's voice slowed. He read the last name and the hall went colder than any winter. It was the name of the councilman's old partner. The broadcast cut. For a long time the world watched itself in the dark. The smuggler breathed. Harrow's small screen went blank. In the city squares, people put down their trades and looked to one another. The cost of secrets had been paid, and the bill had a handwriting that some recognized. In the weeks that followed, small courts began in alleys. Names were argued over in market stalls. Some worlds chose to confess, others chose to break. The hidden fleet kept moving, precise and slow, like a tide that knows which sand to take. And far away, in a room lit by blue, the councilman watched the list again and again until the letters became the shape of a noose, above them all. Unseen in the dark, the fleet waited. It had asked for truth. The galaxy now must decide what to do with it. The war had become thin as a knife. Big guns meant little now. The hidden fleet did not shout. It moved in the darkened cut where it would hurt most. It cut ties, not throats. It cut lies, not lives until the truth could stand. A patrol fleet from the Corps thought it would teach the dark ships a lesson. The warships were proud and loud. They sailed into a field of dead comets that looked like broken teeth. The admiral who led them liked the feel of power. He liked the drum of orders. His men trusted him like a story. But the comets were not empty. The hidden fleet had set a quiet trap. Radios filled with slow songs sung in human tongues. The songs were simple. They were lullabies, learned in long houses, in kitchens, on barges. The warship's systems looped the music in their cores. Men remembered children and mothers. They hit recall and their weapons would not fire, because they could not think of hurting those small voices. The proud ships turned away, feeling sick in a way metal cannot show. They were beaten not by beams, but by memory. In the shadow of the failed battle, the smuggler watched from a small freighter. He had grown from a thief to a man who kept secrets for others. He had trade routes and old favors. He had never wanted to be brave. He had wanted his life to cost little. But the songs had moved something inside him. He remembered the name on Harrow's screen, his mother. Harrow met him later on a quiet moon. The fleet officer wore no grand coat. He stood with his hands in his pockets like a man who keeps a ledger in his head. He offered the smuggler no threats. He offered him work and a small truth. "We take what was hidden," Harrow said. "We do not break people who did not deserve breaking. We find the ones who sold others. We make them see." The smuggler touched the pocket where his letters slept. He felt the thin paper and the small ache. He told Harrow he would help. Harrow gave him a list and a time. The work would be quiet. It would be small. It would matter. A team was made from hands that knew secrets. A hacker who had once worked for the Corps. A pilot who never grew old in the face of storms. The mechanic with oil-dark fingers, and the smuggler. They flew low under the shadows of moons. They moved like thieves who thought of honor. Their target was a memory vault on a mid-ring world. The vault kept records for a trading house that had a soft name in polite books. It kept ledgers, contracts, and a room of tapes no one looked at anymore. The team boarded at night. Cameras saw only hull and stars. Inside, the vault smelled of paper and metal, and something like old sleep. They worked fast. The hacker slipped through locks like a fish through reeds. The pilot watched doors like a careful eye. The mechanic opened a box that had not felt light in decades. The smuggler found a crate stamped with a small sign, Human Cargo Archive. The letters were simple. The crate made the smuggler's chest go numb. They brought the crate to their ship. They opened it like men who fear sunrise. Inside lay tapes and a thin device that looked like a toy. The device had a single button and a plate that still held dust. The pilot pressed the button. The screen lit like a small day. Images rolled. They were not big battles. They were small rooms, men in chairs, a sealed table. Then the screen showed a council chamber in the core. The faces were known. The voice that spoke was traded like a song across the galaxy. It was the voice of General Kellen, the hero who once stopped a famine. The man who had saved whole worlds and been given medals. On the screen, Kellen did not stand in glory. He sat, tired and steady. He spoke to a small room and signed a sheet. Then he spoke into a recorder. His voice was calm. "Erase them," he said. "Make the files clean. Make no names remain." The ship went very quiet. The smuggler's hand closed on the device until his fingers hurt. The mechanic backed away as if heat could burn him. The hacker replayed the line. The words lay on the air like a wet stone. The team watched the tape again and again. In the recording, Kellen did not hide. He did not shout orders like a villain. He sounded like a man who flinched from the act and could not see another way. He named a date. He named a convoy. He named a colony. The camera found a ledger page with a signature and a smudge of ink. The smuggler knew the colony in the ledger. He knew the sound of a name that meant a family. The letters on the page matched the handwriting of men who had smiled in public. The team felt the world tilt outside. Alarms wailed in markets that thought no one watched. News networks tried to speak and found feeds cut. In the council, the pale man in the high chair saw another face on a public screen. It was Kellen's portrait with a ribbon and an award. The public had loved him. He had spoken about mercy and rescue. Now, his words meant a gap where people once lived. The team did not know what to do first. They could sell the tape and make themselves rich. They could hand it to the rebels and watch the world burn for a time. Or they could put it on a quiet feed and let truth move like a slow knife. Harrow leaned on the ship's rail and watched the vault world turn. "This will change everything," he said. The smuggler thought of his mother and the letters that smelled like salt. He thought of the children who woke to empty names. He thought of Kellen's face in the recording, steady and human. He tasted the old coin of cowardice and the new medal of choice. They chose to send the tape to many hands. The hackers split it and threw pieces across channels no one could seal. The feeds took the files and fed them to markets, to family networks, to quiet houses. People watched the recording in kitchens, in bars, on shuttles. Some fell to the floor, some closed their eyes, some stood and screamed. But the worst came last. As the recording spread, the vault device blinked and opened another file by itself. The screen showed a map. It showed a path. It showed a small red line that cut toward the core. Alongside it, there was a date and a single word stamped in old ink, scheduled. The map burned into the team's eyes. The pilot felt the direction like an ache. Harrow swore a quiet word. The smuggler dropped the device as if it had burned him. The file ended. The screen went dark. Outside, the stars seemed closer. The hidden fleet had taken names. It had taken files. It had shown a hand. The galaxy held its breath, because a beloved hero had ordered erasure, and because now, on a cold screen, something else had drawn a red line toward the core. They had the truth. They had the map. They had a choice that might end everything. The ship slipped deeper into shadow and flew toward the place that men called Midnight's Edge. The core burned with uneasy light. The council called an emergency meeting. Halls filled with men and women who had once thought paper and speech would hold the world. Now those papers lay open on screens, and their speech fell into the room, like dry leaves. The recordings, the ledgers, the maps, all of it moved through the glass, like a tide, outside the core. The hidden fleet gathered at the edge of a black sea of stars. They did not shout or gather banners. They were machines, and people bound to a task. Their hulls were scarred and quiet. They waited like a storm that planned to open a single, slow hand. Inside a small chamber, the councilman who had watched the admiral's list and the smuggler who had once sold silence faced each other. The councilman's hands shook. He had dreamed of law. He had signed papers that made colonies easier to forget. He had believed those papers were small things. Now he saw a file that bore his signature. It did not ask for mercy. Harrow came to the meeting on a simple feed. He did not show the whole fleet. He showed a single bridge and a single officer. His face was plain. He spoke slowly, like a man who wanted a ledger read in the light. "We do not come to conquer," he said. "We come to remember. We come to return what was taken." The council spoke in anger and in fear. Men offered fleets, fines, trials. Others whispered that negotiation was the only path left. The palette of promises and threats did nothing to fill the empty places where names had been. People came into the streets and watched the sky. They counted stars and thought of children who had no papers to name them. Harrow did not demand crowns. He did not claim the core for his people. He asked for two things. First, he asked the council to open every file they held to public view. Second, he asked for a place on a small moon where a memory device could be placed. He called it a seed. The seed would not punish. It would only show what had been done. It would make the past visible for any who needed to see. The council argued until words ran like sand through fingers. Then a young delegate, who had watched the feeds from the markets, stood and said a single line: "If we hide again, we lose what is left." The sentence was small. It touched a place that law and power both feared. The councilman looked at the names on his hands and then at the faces in the crowd. He moved his lips and said the old word that had no comfort. "Open it," he said. On the chosen moon, the seed was placed in a hollow where old trees once stood. People came from many systems. They stood shoulder to shoulder. They brought children and old tablets, letters, and broken toys. The seed was small. It looked like a smooth stone in a palm, but it held a light that did not fail. Harrow stood before the people. He did not praise. He only put the seed into a child's hand. The child had eyes that had not seen the core's bright lies. She had been found among the files and named by a woman who had once kept lists. Her fingers curved around the stone like a promise. "Hold this seed," Harrow said. "It will show truth when you need it." The child looked into the faces around her. She did not smile like victory. She smiled like someone who had learned a new word. "Remember," she said, in a voice small but clear. Then the seed opened its first memory. Light flowed like soft water. Images rose, farms that had been taken, lists that had vanished, faces of people who had been moved without goodbyes. The light did not shout blame. It only showed people watched. Some dropped to their knees. Some wept. Some read names aloud and found their own voices on lists. The seed did not remove pain. It made the maps of that pain clear. The council fell into a new work. They opened vaults and let citizens read what had been sealed. The wealthy found names they did not expect. The small found the proof that they had once been taken. Some rulers stepped down with bowed heads. Others left into quiet exile. Courts began that used truth, not whispers, as law. The hidden fleet did not stay to take crowns. Their task was complete in a way that war could not achieve. They had returned names. They had shown the ledger. They had given a tool to keep memory from dying again. Harrow and his officers did not stand on pedestals. They helped place the seed, and then they walked to their ships. The farewell was quiet. Children played at the moon's edge, and the mechanic from the trading moon pressed his palm to a hull and said nothing. The smuggler watched the ships and thought of his mother. He had no coin to pay for the price he felt, but he had a list of names that no one could hide anymore. People called after the fleet. Some cursed, some thanked. Harrow only nodded before they left. Harrow turned to the gathered crowd and said a line that would be written in many small books later. "We do not stay to rule," he said. "We stay to make sure the world remembers who it was." Then the ships moved like slow birds into the night. They vanished among stars and dead suns. The sky closed around their paths. The world changed after that. Markets reopened with new names on ledgers. Children learned the histories that had been taken. Old songs returned to new mouths. The council became less a place of hidden hands, and more a house of opened papers. People began to build a small thing called memory into law. Yet as the fleet faded, the seed gave one last image. The child looked into the stone and saw a place on a map far from the moon. It showed another mark, not the same as the midnight anchor, but similar, a sign half remembered. Under it was a single word, marker. The seed did not speak more. The image closed like a shutter. The crowd watched the child hold that small stone. Some felt the relief of truth. Others felt the pull of a new question. The fleet had returned names, but it had not answered everything. The galaxy had been shaken. It had been asked to remember. It had also been given a hint that elsewhere, another hidden thing waited. People went home with heavy faces and lighter hands. They read lists by candle. They planted memorials. They named streets after places no one had thought to name. The smuggler kept his small box of letters and added a new one. He wrote a single line and folded it into the smuggler's chest. "We remember now. We watch." In the dark beyond the moon, something else moved. A small point of light winked on. A dry chart. It was not the hidden fleet. It was a mark. The galaxy had more secrets than it knew. The child tucked the seed into her pocket and walked into the night. She did not look up. She only kept the stone warm in her hand, as people keep small promises they do not yet understand.